Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Mickton. Nice to be here. One of the things that I think all of us do is that we're always talking, and often we're talking to people or in conversations, or we're trying to make connections through conversations, or maybe we're presenting something. It might be a slide deck, or it might be even a graphic or some desktop publishing, whatever it is, happens in any context that you are in, be it in education, in the professional world, even amongst families and friends, there's always communication and you're always trying to make connections. Those connections could be some type of networking where you're trying to meet somebody that might have some information, or maybe by meeting them, you're going to be inspired, or maybe they might have some skill set that you want to leverage, or together you want to collaborate. And the communication is really important because when you're speaking, you want to make sure people connect with your ideas, that they resonate, and when they walk away, they remember what you said, and that maybe it inspires them or even prompts them to do something differently. So this is something that I think we all do, and I think we kind of take it for granted because we're used to speaking all day, and that's what most humans do. But I think sometimes we don't understand the nuances and how sometimes how we speak and the ums and the ahs, and or even how we network, where we kind of bulldoze our way into something, or maybe don't have that more sophisticated, gentle, humble, kind of neutral approach in the connections you're trying to make in your networking. Sometimes we maybe don't reflect on that, or don't realize how, if you do spend time and thinking about how you're networking professionally and how you're communicating professionally, really can maybe change the dynamics of how you're perceived, how people might want to collaborate, how people might hire you, how might people get you into a team, etc. And I think one of the things that as educators and people in all kinds of organizations, we do it every day, but maybe we don't understand that there is a real science behind this. And today I'm super excited because I know Dan and I have always said it wouldn't it be great to have people that really focus on this. And we kind of maybe laugh or snigger when you say, oh, a communication specialist or a networking professional specialist. There is kind of the cynicism, but I think we really shouldn't have that attitude, because these professionals out there, and we have two here today, really can make a huge difference in the way you're perceived and the way you're making those connections. So what I'd like to do straight away is introduce our two guests. Our first guest is Helen, who is a public speaking and voice coach, and she has worked in healthcare and humanitarian areas, and she really helps people to share their work clearly and confidently. And through her company, Present Potential, she provides coaching and speaking, presenting, and interviews with a focus on supporting non-native English speakers and those working in complex fields. She facilitates creative team building projects and is the author of a brand new book, Courageous Action. And for our audience, remember, we have our show notes and you can get to the book right there. There's a link to it. I really encourage you to look at it because it's a wonderful book that's very kind of more than just a book. It's like a workbook. There's a lot of strategies. There's something very concrete. It's really something that's super concrete and I think would be really helpful. Her background includes performance teaching, HR, and international non-governmental organization work. So, Helen, thank you so much for being here today on the International Schools Podcast.
Thank you so much, John.
And with her is Mandy. And believe it or not, Mandy is also Helen's friend, and they do a lot of work together. And so I thought, how nice if we could have both of you on together. And Mandy is a facilitator, coach, and speaker who works with individuals and teams on professional growth and collaboration. She leads MasterMinds, a peer community designed to support accountability and shared learning, and she has more than 15 years experience running workshops and events. Mandy also teaches career development at Swiss universities and in business schools, and has worked with leadership teams as talent management and on communication strategies. Her background is in hospitality management, includes international experience in Spain, Ireland, and China, and she has shared her entrepreneurial journey in a TEDx talk. Mandy, thank you so much for being part of this conversation and the International Schools Podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. It's nice to be here.
And you both are very international because that's our audience, and you've lived in many different places. Mandy's actually not a native English speaker, but we would be fooled by it. And you grew up as a third culture child. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, so I'm actually Dutch originally. I've never lived there in my life, but it is my mother tongue. I grew up in Spain and now I've been living in Switzerland for a very long time.
And Helen is also kind of a third culture child because she is not from Switzerland. And where are you from? And kind of tell us your third culture experience a bit, Helen.
Sure. I always start my work asking people if they can guess where my accent is from, because there's not many of us in the world, and I'm actually from New Zealand. So brought up there, and I left when I was about 23 years old, and I haven't gone back. And I made my way through Scotland, Italy, and now Switzerland for 20 years.
Wonderful. So, one of the things I would like you both to maybe explore at first is, when we think communicating across cultures, and both of you come from different places in the world and have worked in multicultural environments, how do you each approach making communication, whether, say, it's in meetings or in a corporate room or presentations, or even in the classroom or a school leader in front of a faculty? Clear, inclusive, and culturally aware. And what might be some of the adjustments that you often coach people to think about in understanding across cultures? Because sometimes we speak and we make assumptions. And I would love to hear from both of you in the work that you're doing with both of your organizations and your coaching. What are some of the things that you've noticed and that you would maybe want our audience to think about? Can I start with you, Mandy?
Yes, absolutely. So I work a lot in the networking context as it's part of everything we do, whether we're staying, going, or moving. And this is a question that often comes up. I always say approach any networking situation, and especially a cross-cultural one, with curiosity and interest and an open mind and respect. So I think that once you step into it like that, you can share more easily. So ask questions. If you're not sure if the question is appropriately correct, share where you're coming from. I ask because I tend to do it this way, and I noticed you had a different approach. Could you tell me more about it? So if you share a little bit why you're asking the question when you're unsure if yes or no, you can ask it, give your experience, share a little bit about yourself, and invite the other person to respond. So I tend to really encourage people to be open-minded about it and also share their own background.
I think it's really interesting that you listed some words, but there was this word of respect.
Mm.
And also, you framed the way you were engaging with a person as saying, this is where I'm coming from, but where are you coming from? How little do we do that? Is this something that you pick up a lot?
I find that often people are either naturally better listeners or better talkers. And rarely do we learn to balance these out. So if you're a better listener, learn to share more. If you're a better talker, learn to ask more questions. So I find that it's really important to do the two. And yeah, that's why I mention it actually.
I like this idea of if you're a good listener, then talk more, and then if you're a good talker, listen more, because I think sometimes talkers tend to like to talk and they kind of roll over what somebody has, and that silence and that capacity to kind of sit back and maybe count to a certain number and let that silence allow people to feel the confidence to come out. Wonderful. Helen, what are your thoughts?
So I think those are all great thoughts. And what I would add is that what I teach people and what I try to do is always be audience centric. We get so stuck up in our own thoughts and ideas and don't necessarily think about who's receiving them. And that's exactly where that question comes from. So the idea is to, in whatever situation you're going into, the more you understand, know, and are curious about the people that you're speaking with, the better you can then tailor your message and your way of communicating with them. So I coach people to be very adaptable on that. And that's the first thing. Before you open your PowerPoint or start writing your message, thinking, who am I speaking to? What do they know? What do they expect? What do they need? What do they what are they worried about? Anything. The more information you have, the better you can then tailor that your message to them, because we're not all the same. And actually, it can be really harmful if we assume that everyone communicates and understands the world the same way we do. So having that first step, understanding, and then filtering our delivery, the words, etc., can really make the message come across much stronger.
I really like this idea that you bring up of kind of doing the pre-research, getting to know your audience, because I think sometimes people are so nervous. They think about, oh, is my PowerPoint or my Google slide deck going to work? And my ideas are amazing, but how? And so it's almost like you're saying you have to do some detective work. So is this by going online and researching? And Mandy, jump in too. So when you're trying to understand who your audience is it really doing some online research, or is it just understanding the dynamic and being, as Mandy mentioned, being respectful and open? I'm just curious, because I think so often we don't do that research. We just assume I've been invited to speak, so they must like what I say, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it.
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of being strategic about it and just even taking a moment to think about it, to step back out of our own heads and think about who's receiving the messages. So, yes, you can, if you have time, research. If you're invited to an interview, a podcast, listen to some podcasts, understand the background of the people interviewing you, for example. But in any environment, it's the same. It can be just a 2 minute reflection on who am I speaking to, what is their experience of the world, as well as I can understand. And then you can dive deeper if you have the time, and you can ask those questions. So often I encourage, if you're invited to speak, ask the organizers, whoever's invited you, what sort of people are likely to be in the room, what other things are going on at the same time, what other subjects would they be listening to, so that you can start building up this picture in your mind of these people. Obviously, being careful not to fall into stereotypes, but you can either do it quite a quick and nasty way of thinking about this just from the top of your head, and ideally in a more formal situation, finding more to dig into by asking questions either directly of the people or the organizers of the event.
I think this is so important to have that kind of frame before you go in. And often the organizers will have some insights maybe that you don't realize. Mandy.
I was thinking that, of course, that research is so important. And once you've done it, to really build on that and think, okay, when you're doing a presentation to a large room, what is the one thing that I can give them that if they don't remember anything else, to really narrow it down? What do I want to give this audience now that I know this about them? So I think that's really important in a context of a presentation. When you're speaking to people individually, this getting to know your audience can be done in a much more direct way through remembering to ask questions. Do you agree with this? Have you had an experience with that? Do you have an opinion on it? How do you feel about X, Y, Z? And really engaging people on what you're discussing with them, so you get direct feedback and learn as you go together.
So do you feel if you go with this approach of asking questions, it's also part of this idea of respect? So you're really showing a true intrinsic interest in that person by asking those questions?
Absolutely. I think respect is the absolute baseline of anything. And people wonder a little bit about asking questions. Will it become across as rude? So I think there's a two-sided part to this. The first thing is, if you're genuinely open-minded and curious and respectful, you will feel where the limit is. We have to trust ourselves as well a little bit, and we have to watch the body language and how people are responding. So am I getting yes, no answers? Okay, I'll stop with the questions. However, often people are just a bit shy to volunteer information, but most people do like to talk about themselves, about their experience. And so if it's done in a correct and respectful and genuinely curious way, typically that tends to lead to quite nice off the track conversations that not everyone else is having the same discussion over and over.
And this obviously then also is information that helps you as you start thinking, how could we take this further? Could it be like
Absolutely.
a coffee or something? Helen, what are your thoughts on this idea of asking the questions?
I think it's absolutely important, so important, because communication is the way that we connect with the world. And if we just, it's a one way, speaking, I'm speaking to you and you just need to listen, then it's not really a conversation. So I think having smart questions, and often people need to prepare these in advance, especially you talked before about being nervous. There are questions that you can go beyond. What do you come here often? Do you like the food? You can go beyond that, and you can have those ready, and that's the opening for a deeper communication, a deeper connection with people. And then, as you say, most networking is not about collecting, business cards. It's about finding people to connect with. And this is just the first point, or maybe it's the second or third time you've met this person, but that's not the be all and end all, the event where you're meeting people. Hopefully there are deeper connections that can be built with time. So asking the questions will help you understand which people you connect with and which people will be interesting to continue the communication with. You
Yeah,
don't build a network just by shaking a few hands and collecting some business cards. That's not the goal, nor the end result that you want.
but I think that analogy that you're sharing as shaking hands and sharing business cards is what we often perceive as networking. I'm at a cocktail party or wherever I might be. Let's see how many people I can share my business card with. And I think this is really important. A lot of people will say, "Oh, why would I need a communication coach? Why would I need a networking coach?" And there's a certain amount of cynicism around that because we all think as individuals, well, I speak all day. So, and people seem, I have a job, I have a team, everything's fine. Or, I'm meeting people here and there. What are some of the misconceptions that you often have to break with people as you start engaging with them? Because you have clients, both of you have individuals, you have companies, you have multinationals that are calling you in and you're working with them in many different contexts. So I'm wondering, what is some of the misconceptions that you have to bring to the table as you first engage with them? And Mandy, you have a story.
I have a small story to share, and I will answer that question. But I am, so personally, I'm quite an introverted person, very shy, and it surprises people typically when I tell them this. And, when I think now, wow, I'm teaching on networking and I'm working a lot with how to increase, I would never in a million years have believed it because I feel like I'm still actually such an awkward person, but I have developed good tools. And so this is actually exactly why I think I'm good at what I do, because I understand that it's not so easy to just go and put yourself out there. So the very first thing I tell people to do is replace the word networking in your vocabulary and in your mind with making connections. That makes a massive difference. And then once you've done that, it's just about meeting interesting people, understanding who they are, them understanding who you are, bringing that across correctly, and then connections actually happen naturally. It's much less painful, it's much less awkward, and then it happens much easier that you attract the people that work well with you. And those that don't work well, you just don't attract them and you don't move towards them. So not to force it, replace networking with making connections, and then just go out there and meet some nice people.
I like this idea of getting word networking out because I
Yeah.
think that's kind of been overused, professional networking, my professional learning network.
And it scares people. That word freaks people out. You say networking, oh no, I don't like that, because they imagine stiff, small talk, a forced situation. Everyone's awkward. No one likes doing it. Most of us are introverts anyway, right? So yeah, it doesn't help us at all. And that's the power of the words that we use, in fact.
So when you both work with individuals and coaches, sometimes you're working with teams that have been together. and suddenly you're saying, well, we need to recalibrate, you need to redo this. I'm just curious, how do you work with a team that maybe has been working together? They've spent a few years, and you come in, and Helen, you're talking about communication and presentation, and Mandy, you're talking about careers and making those connections. What are some things that often you have to undo? What are some of the things you have to get them to unlearn? Because unlearning often is one of the hardest things to do, more
Mm.
than relearning or learning. So, Helen, what is one of the things that you find, especially with teams that are familiar with each other?
Mhm. So one thing is that I'm maybe I'm lucky, but I don't often get put into the situation where I'm teaching or facilitating a group who don't want to be there.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
so that's already something. But in terms of what they need to unlearn, or I think as a facilitator, and I know Mandy agrees with this because we do co-facilitate a few events as well. The most important thing is to create the environment and be very intentional about the environment that we're creating for the learning and exploration to take place. So one of the things that we have done before together is, and I, which I love, is to create a safe space where we can play, explore, connect, and be very human, because we're so used to building up this mask, especially in work situations. And whether it's cracking a joke or making fun of my accent, or finding that connection so that everyone is on the same, has the same vibe. And usually it works quite quickly to shift the energy in the room to something that's more playful and therefore creative and open and productive.
I like this idea that you're saying you're creating the safe space, but you're also wanting to have play and fun. Do you think that play and fun is kind of tears down that kind of tension, or like, oh, we're in this room again all together?
Oh, definitely. When we have sort of two ways of working. One is in the very logical part of our brain, where we're critical, analytical, strategic, and often people are used to using a lot of that in their workspace. But then we have this whole other creative part of our being that allows so much more exploration and actually productive learning. A lot of your audience are teachers or educators, and they know that if you're in a stress situation and all logical part of the brain, you can only get so far. And that's also the nerves and things can break those two parts of yourself apart. So to find the child within us through improvisational games, or simply one of the games that Mandy and I often use is these Dixit cards. So this is a very beautiful cards, and just get people to choose one of those cards and explain how helps explain, puts words to a feeling of how they feel about the content that we're going to cover, or the way they're feeling today, or the weather, whatever it is, so that we're tapping into that more creative part of the brain that's away from words and is more productive in a learning space. I'm
Yeah,
sure Mandy has some other ideas that she can add.
Mandy.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fun and the play is super important, and I love to do those workshops that we run with Helen. I do, however, also on my side come into quite tense teams where they don't want to see me arrive because I have been
I'm going to
called
interrupt
in.
you, Mandy. Why don't they want to see you? So some CEO or CFOs hired you, and they're like, "What is Mandy doing in this room?"
Well, I've been hired to support the team in their communication and improving the communication, but they're already feeling a little bit tense between them.
Okay.
And so they're sort of wondering, is she coming to check on us? What's going to happen? And I use Discover assessments as a starting point. So this is a tool that, it comes in many shapes and sizes. There's lots of different assessments, but every individual takes this assessment. A computer generates a report, and this is a computer generated report. Nobody has given any opinions. It's based on what they have put in for themselves. And there are two aspects to this. So the first thing, typically the reason why I'm there is there's some sort of a communication problem, right? And so the first thing I do is I have an individual feedback session with every single person who took it so
Wow.
that they know what is in the report, what are we doing here, how are we going to go about it, and how is the information going to be used, and what is confidential, so that they know exactly what they're walking into and what information comes from them. And then when you bring everybody together, that's the opportunity to open up discussions that usually they don't dare to have together. Because typically, many tense situations arise from people wanting to be kind to each other, people not wanting to hurt each other, not wanting to be impolite, and so they just don't say the thing they're feeling uncomfortable about. But that goes on and on and on. And then eventually they're just really annoyed. They have no more patience. They don't like each other anymore, and they're just avoiding each other. So paradoxically, the origin is them wanting to be kind, and the output is that they're not getting along. So when we bring this back into the picture and we can say, well, when I do this, what I'm hoping for is X, Y, Z. I find it difficult to say no because I want to help you, but I'm actually already overloaded. So we bring them together and we have them have all of these discussions in a formatted and structured way. But because they've had this assessment already, they sort of know what is different about them, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And so they go into it much more comfortable. And I think that there are 3 key tools that they take away with them. The first one is listening better to each other. The second one is to learn to paraphrase things. Did I understand correctly that what you said was X, Y, Z? Yes or no? And then finally, to keep in mind, clear is kind. When I'm trying to, unclear is unkind. When I'm trying to let you down easy, in fact, you didn't understand I let you down at all. You didn't understand I said no. You thought I was going to do it.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So being clear is kind, being unclear is unkind.
Yes.
And so those are it sounds like those are 3 pillars that you really try to build with those teams. That maybe the intent is positive, but the impact is negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And reminding people of that, we relate to all of that, right? Like we always try to be kind, especially at the beginning. And then at some point it just goes pear-shaped. But when we're reminded of that, and we're reminded that the person in front of us also set out with that intention, it sort of takes the sting out of things and you can start to rebuild conversations.
And I think very likely in both of your contexts is when you work with teams that have been together, very likely at the beginning there was a lot of good intent, and then just the busyness and the craziness, deadlines, whatever it might be, personalities, you quickly get into this toxic environment where there's always this elephant in the room and everybody knows it's there, but nobody wants to address it. And it sounds like what I really like the way with your approach is that you first let them assess themselves so they get to know who they are in a very neutral, kind of non-opinionated way, and then working with those 3 pillars. Do you think teams generally don't function well? Is that just endemic of teams, especially maybe teams that have been together? Because sometimes from my experience, having led teams and been in teams, so often we have good intent, we have norms, we have agreements, but really they kind of vanish. And the busyness of the day and the toxicity of, deadlines and all this kind of pollute that. And you have the agreements on the piece of paper on your agenda, but nobody's willing to address it. Is it then just a matter of discipline and being really deliberate about it? I'll let either of you jump in. I know my questions are terrible. Sorry, they're really complicated.
It's a great question. I think it's a really, really good question. So I have an answer. I love this topic. The thing is, some people like rules and regulations and sticking to them, and others within that same team don't. So different people like different things, and within every single team, you will have those that like to be creative, those that like to be structured, those that go into details, those that fly over them, those that want action, those that need a bit more time. And that is normal. It's absolutely normal, and it's strong because that means that you have a diverse team that is capable of doing different things and hopefully capable of achieving the mission that you've set out. The key is in respecting the differences, like the cultural differences, respecting the simple preferences, and understanding them and finding how can we make this work for us. And I don't think all teams are doomed to toxicity, but I do think that the key lies in being open and honest and realistic.
Maybe
Yeah.
I'd add to that, and I totally agree. We have to remember that a team is just a group of individuals, humans with all their flaws and all their fancies, brought together for a common good. So it's easy to say, oh, this team, that team, this department, but in fact, they're all individuals and they're all dealing with their own things. They've all got their own preferences, as Mandy was saying. So we need to find ways of bringing people together and creating a culture that's productive, and that could look like anything. So I think teams are just a way of organizing individuals to get things done. And I definitely have seen many effective teams. They're not doomed. I think they can very quickly create a culture that is potentially not productive. And so this is, it's everyone's responsibility, but in my work in particular, I work with a lot of managers, and I get them to be very intentional about the simple things like a culture is built with a series of situations and being together and through the communication, etc. And so one way to shift a culture or to ensure that it is effective and a good place to be is to think carefully, okay, our meetings, not just have the meeting because everyone has a meeting and you have it once a week and it's a staff update or whatever, but intention, so for the manager to think, what does this team need? And what do I want to get out of this meeting or need to get out of this meeting? And by approaching each one-on-one, each meeting, each interaction with intent, that can help make sure that it's not just by chance that you have a good environment or not. You can be more intentional, and it doesn't take a lot of effort, but it does take some reflection.
And I think both of you, that's what I'm really getting out of this, is this idea that you have to be intentional and also reflective. And it's about maybe also pausing. You talk about managers, because, as a manager or leader, you've got this team and you have a certain responsibility and people are looking to you for leadership. But also if you're not, as you both say, really thinking about the dynamics and being intentional and really, what do I want to get out of this and what do people want to get out? And I think, Helen, you bring a good point. Sometimes we just get into this meeting cycle because it's a culture of meetings, and Monday afternoon we have meetings and they quickly become actually not very productive because there's no real intention. When you both work with these leaders, do you find that a lot of leaders why aren't they being intentional and why aren't they pausing? Is it because they're just too busy? Mandy?
There's an answer.
I have an answer. It's the ego.
Oh, I like
It's
that.
the
Okay.
ego.
We're going into the ego zone.
Especially when you are in a position of leadership. You have been put there, you have been given a certain responsibility, and it is very hard to sort of let go and hand over to the team when you need to, because it needs to look like you've done your job. So it's just very difficult to put that aside when you're building a thriving team culture. There is vulnerability that needs to be allowed. You need to build trust, and all of this, people need to connect to you, and they will not connect to you if all you're doing is asking for performance and it's just that balance is very difficult to find. Most people, most leaders, when I speak to them one-on-one, the intention is there. They want to give the trust to their people, but they need to perform. They're being judged on the KPIs. So this balance is just extremely difficult to find.
And you're saying that there's the ego. Is it, you think, a culture? So in the past, we've had a culture where leadership was very top-down, hierarchical. And now, there's Brené Brown's book. There are many books out there, and Helen's book, of course, Courage in Action, where we're realizing that actually effective leaders are ones that show a certain amount of vulnerability and are comfortable actually letting go a bit, not because they don't care, but to really get more of a collaborative consensus type of dynamic going on. And I know, Helen, you wanted to add, so I don't know if you want
Yeah,
to add?
yeah, I can add here. I mean, I think it's true what Mandy was saying about the ego, but the other thing to keep in mind is many people who find themselves in a leadership position have got no training whatsoever in leading.
Good
And
point.
so it's baptism by fire, sink or swim. And this is where I come back to the question that you asked earlier, John, in terms of, why does someone need a communication coach? Why do people need coaches in general to help them do their jobs? It's because we're not teaching this, the communication skills, connection skills, leadership skills in schools right through. And so it's very rare for someone to, they get promoted because they're good at their job in most situations, technically good at their job, which doesn't mean that they have any idea about running, managing a team, managing people, even deadlines and things. So this is what I see over and over again is, I think it's called the Peters principle. I want to call it Peters principle. Correct me if I'm wrong. But people getting promoted above where they should be. And it's nice. It's hard. I understand. It's hard to say, no, I don't want an extra 20,000, whatever, a year. And so they say, yes, it looks good. They think they can do it. But then a lot of people who come to me find themselves in a situation where they technically understand the job. Maybe sometimes they're okay managing personnel, but they find themselves not able to communicate their ideas, usually both up and down, if we're going to go with the hierarchy. And so, or they've never thought about it, or I've got people who have very small voices, or always sound angry even though they're not. And because we don't learn how to use our voice in an intentional way, and we don't learn how to give feedback, for example, or motivate teams. So I really think a lot of it also comes from a lack of support for these people. And that's why the work that Mandy and I do is so important, because whether it's in a group or one-on-one, we really start building those skills with the person in a very individual and specific way for whatever they need at that time. And it's very individualistic. I don't teach, you must do ABC and speak like this. No, what is your communication style? How do you connect with the world? How can you better get across your message?
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting what you said, and I think it was a Peter principle, is this idea that often people get promoted because they've met all the KPIs, or they're just a very good teacher or a very good manager. And that's so interesting to hear that even in the context of professional organizations are not in the education sphere, where people climb up, and a CEO might be a CEO not because they actually have leadership skills, it's just because they've been making a lot of money or the share price has gone up. Mandy, you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm listening to Helen, and it's exactly that. And I think both of us in the work we do, I think I work on the internal self-awareness and Helen works on communicating it. But what both of us do is we sort of think through with the person, let's remove the mask, let's remove the form, let's remove everything around it. Tell me what you really want to say, or tell me what you really want to do. And then we reconstruct it in a way that whether it's in your mind and you're clearer on where you want to go in the future, or whether it's communicating that better in a presentation or in another way, in a way that's natural to you, because we get caught up in all the, I should speak this way, I should do that, I should want a promotion, I should want to move up the hierarchy. But so it's really about removing the mask, looking at what's really there, and then reconstructing in a much more natural way, because actually we're all fine. There's nothing wrong with any of us, but we often feel like there's all kinds of things wrong. So it's just, yeah, that part.
That's pretty gutsy for, say, you're in an organization and you're a leader and somebody comes in and says, well, guess what? We're going to remove the mask. I mean, that's a big ask to first of all, be vulnerable, and also undo maybe what is years of habits that are maybe even cognitive habits, or can become triggers that are just really coming automatically without even knowing it. And sometimes when we get into these triggers, we don't reflect on them. They just become habit and we fall into them. And only very likely the team can highlight, oh, you're in that zone again. I'm wondering, when you encounter those leaders, are you most often being asked by somebody above saying, oh, you need to work with this manager? Or is it organizations say, hey, we have Helen and Mandy available. If you're interested, reach out. I'm just curious, how much is push and how much is kind of, oh, come in?
I think it's a mix, at least from my point of view, it's a mix. But as I said, I'm lucky I don't. In fact, I just had this conversation today with a woman who wants me to work with one of her staff members. And, I find it really difficult to go, sure, let's do it. Here we go. I always insist on talking to the person one-on-one because I'm not interested in trying to help someone who's not really ready to be vulnerable, not really ready to put in the work. Because, communication is a habit that we've created, and it takes a lot of effort to change these habits, right? So I need to, yes, I get from both individual, possibly more, but I also get the HR or a manager coming. And what I've found has worked over the years is to get that input from whoever's coming to me, but then asking for that conversation one-on-one. Because for me, my work, as you said, is so vulnerable. You have to be so ready to put in the work that I find it very difficult to work one-on-one, at least, with someone who's not really all in and understands the growth that they can get, is ready to put in the work. With the team, it's a little bit different. What I find usually, even if, you always get a couple of naysayers, people who are like, oh, I don't really want to do this, I don't really need this. What I find is usually they get something out of it. And they're like, oh, well, I'm a really confident presenter, but what you said about this, oh, that made me think. Usually there's something in there for them. Even if they think they don't have anything to learn, hopefully they come with a growth mindset, and then they're open to engage. Even if it feels like it's a game, they usually learn something about themselves or about their teammates or other leaders.
It's interesting how you say there's some people that are the naysayers and say, no, I can't learn anything. And then at the end, they're like, oh, by the way, I just think that's always wonderful when you're working in that role as a coach or mentor or facilitator. In that room, there are always going to be the cynics. And if you can turn that around, it's a nice little win. Mandy, what are your thoughts on this idea about the mask? Because you're coming in. Mostly are people calling you in because they're above and they're saying you need to work on this person, or is it more an invitation as a resource?
So when I'm working with a company or a team, it's more indeed because I've been told to go and I don't have that many willing participants. They're usually a bit suspicious, they're usually a bit worried. So it's really the essential part is my openness as a person to accept whoever is in front of me. And to have those one-on-one sessions. I insist on this because sometimes you can also just come in and work with a team without having seen them individually. But I always insist, I want to see every single person one-on-one. Yes, they don't have the choice. They will have to book that session with me and they will have to show up at the team building. But I need to know they've seen me before. I need to understand how each person is situated. Are they open? Are they worried? Are they sharing things with me? Are they very holding back? So that I can prepare for the team session as best as possible. And I know what needs to be addressed. So within the team sessions, I don't share any confidential information, but I know what questions to ask. How does this group say no to each other? Discuss that kind of thing. So I think that is really important for me to go about it in that way, to first discuss with them, reassure them, and for myself to be able to evaluate how are we best going to approach this team. Like Ellen said at the very beginning, it's about knowing your audience first and foremost. As a facilitator, your role is just to ask questions and to get people to talk to each other. So yeah.
And John, your educators would know this as well. A lot of your audience who are teachers or educators, it's awfully difficult to teach someone. I'm thinking about my own teenage boys. It's difficult to teach them if they're not in the space and willing and open to teach them.
Absolutely.
So, you need to create an environment and doing it one-on-one or is definitely a way in, because what we're working on is quite vulnerable, as you mentioned. So they need to feel safe and that connection with us as coaches or facilitators.
And I think it's interesting, both of you really emphasize the importance, even if you're working with a team or a department, that individual. And Mandy, you were quite categoric. They are going to all meet with me. It's a non-negotiable. And I think that's really interesting because it's really giving you an opportunity to get to know them, but them also to get to know you. So when you get into that team dynamic, oh, I know Mandy, she's a nice person, or oh yeah, I had a chat with Helen, we're good. I think that's really interesting. And you both were quite insistent on it. And I think that's, so often as teams, we sometimes don't spend the time to get to know each other individually. Or even leaders, they're so busy, and just, having the conversation or the conversations where you're listening and asking questions and you're not talking. Because I think that's throughout this whole conversation, you both have been really clear about the importance of listening, this idea of respect and asking questions, but questions that are deeper than what color do you like? Oh, you like, cake or whatever that might be. I'm wondering, do you think there are teams that are uncoachable?
Probably.
Mandy, yes.
Yeah, I think yes. I mean, to be honest, the teams that we get called into, already there's a certain level of health
Mm.
in the company culture because they are open to inviting us in. But there are many, many, many that don't do that because it is much easier to just stick your head in the sand and pretend everything's fine. We're reaching our KPIs. Fine. Where's our problem? Never mind that people don't like each other and they're all about to go on burnout or leaving or looking for a new job. So yes, if your company is fostering a culture like that, is ignoring the red flags and is pretending everything is fine, that's an uncoachable team because the culture does not allow for it. There is not enough trust for people to actually believe they want to help us.
So when you have an organization that creates a culture of being open to having somebody like you, Mandy, and Helen come in, do you first work with the CEO, or, do you kind of, and I hate this hierarchy thing, but we're still stuck in it. There's somebody at the top and then you trickle down and there are different departments. Do you feel that when an organization says, yes, we're open to this idea of bringing in coaches for communication and networking and connection, do you try to first work with them so they understand it before you go into different layers in the organization?
I know Mandy wants to say something. I can see her.
I'm smiling because there is usually in the types of situation that generally it's hard to coach the team, there is usually a gap between what is being said and what is really being done.
Ah.
And so the first discussion to have with the leadership team is, okay, this is the process. This is what's likely to happen. We're going to hear a lot of complaints. When we hear complaints, when we hear truths, when we hear honesty, the expectation you're creating is that they will be addressed. And to address them, that takes time. People will leave, things will change. You have to take a good hard look at yourself. Are you willing to do that? And that's when you start to see how genuine is this request, because you start to get maybe some shifts or you never hear back from them. So for me, the first thing I do is I'm very clear about the consequences this is going to bring with it, the expectations you're generating, and I need to know, are you serious about it or not? Because I don't like to get everyone to open up and to talk. And then they're like, well, that workshop with her, actually, it was all talk and no action.
And that's a very common comment when, it's kind of like, we'll do due diligence, but actually we don't have time to really dig into the
It's
problem.
just for the form. They're not really serious about it. And so usually if I notice that, I'll somehow like see, are we just going to do a one-off thing, or we're not going to go do that deep, or it's going to stay relatively superficial, or maybe this is not the right time.
Helen, you've been shaking your head as Mandy's saying that. Are you experiencing the same?
Yeah, I mean, I am, and I'm sort of shaking my head because I think it's such a pity, but it's such a reality that we live in. I mean, from my experience, I guess I'm often called in for something a little bit lighter, if we can call it that. So my experience is, I have had these experiences, but I think the way that I can get into a company without total buy-in is that we're just having a nice day, we're going to explore our voices, or we're going to learn how to manage our system and speak more confidently, or we're going to work on how to put a good presentation together, or we're going to pitch better our marketing ideas to the leadership. And so it's less committal in a way. But of course, what I bring to that goes beyond the technical skills that I'm sharing. It's creating a culture of learning and feedback, which I bring into all of my sessions. It's not me judging whether something is good or bad. I teach the group how to become more aware of other people and how to give constructive feedback along the way. So in my light touch, we tick a few boxes, we've done some training with our staff, I like to think that I help to shift the culture, make people more open to feedback, to being creative, to helping each other become better communicators. So not necessarily even seeing the CEO at any stage. So maybe that's a sneaky way of getting around that.
Under the back door.
Through the back door, but my programs, they don't involve this the insight assessment and work that Mandy does. So it's less, I hope that I'm helping people, but it's less potentially life-changing for the organization.
Mandy?
I think it's essential what you're bringing, because it helps people find their voices in a non-threatening way. And it's really important for them to feel confident in a way that doesn't involve like a whole soul-searching process, right? It's not necessarily the case that either, but I think we need to come from both sides. And your what you bring is extremely powerful, because even if nothing else, they're going to sound more confident and they're much more likely to get what they want. So I think it's really important.
I didn't want to diminish what I do, but I just think it's, it's a different approach. It's like, I do some training with your staff, whereas you're like, we're going to, lift the lid on a potentially can of worms. But it absolutely is. And, I think they work well together. And we've done some workshops that touch on both. So really interesting.
And I think, as you're both saying, you need to kind of have both, because you're always going to have in teams people that would love to speak up, and they might speak up with you, Helen, and Mandy one-on-one. But when they're in the group, they're in shutdown mode. And understanding, is this, you have to be courageous and have the tools. And that's what I think is coming out of this conversation. You really create an atmosphere where people have this toolkit that they build that gives them the capacity maybe to feel a little more daring and open to these kind of conversations. I'm curious if, if you had school leaders or CEOs or any, management people, what is the most common mistake people do that you would encourage them to revisit?
I've got a really practical, so-called easy thing that I think is almost universal. We all speak too quickly.
So
I'm like, we went from something quite strategic and deep to something that's very, very practical. If I could teach everyone, or just allow everyone to realize, if we slowed down a couple of notches, we would be more eloquent in what we're saying, clearer in our communication, and being clear is kind, as we said before. But also it gives space for your audience, who you're speaking to, connecting to, more space to absorb and connect with what you're saying. So that's, it's very, very practical, and there's no magic trick around it. It's just reminding yourself just to slow down. The more you do it, the easier it becomes.
When you're saying slow down, are you saying, in other words, it doesn't mean like, but you're saying giving pauses, maybe even counting a few numbers in between sentences? Is it structured like that? Is that what you're trying to share?
Yeah, there are two things. One is the rate of speech. So I can speak really quickly like this, and then you're going to feel quite excited, or it might sound like I'm nervous. Or I can speak slower and then give space between my words, but also elongate my vowels, so I have a more calm rate. And then, of course, there's the pause, which I do put on the side because it's so powerful to underline, to highlight a point, and give you time to reflect, to breathe, to think about what you want to say next, and the other person to repeat what you've just said to them and to allow that to connect to other things in their brain. So it's yeah.
It's such a simple thing, but we don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Especially
great.
when we're nervous or excited. And
Yeah.
it changes, as I showed, it changes. We're so connected as people that it changes your heart rate along with mine when I'm speaking too quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And often you'll see people will say an idea and they repeat it over and over again in 10 different ways. And you're at the end like, I got it. Why are you telling me again? So that's great. Mandy, what about you?
For me, one of the big struggles I see is that people say yes because they don't know how to say no.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, nice.
And so what I often tell people is practice saying no. Practice with small things. Would you like to try this candy? It's not really appealing to me. No, thanks. Uh, so practice with the small things. But in a society where there is so much to do, we are all overwhelmed. We are all running from one place to the other. We really run the risk of spreading ourselves way too thinly.
Mm.
So to really be more selective of what we just say yes to, what we give our time and energy to, and make sure that they are prioritized correctly, because we can say yes endlessly and then we end up being exhausted. We end up being a little bit resentful because we didn't really want to do it. And why are they asking that of me? I would never ask that of them, but I didn't know how to say no. So get comfortable learning how to say no in a way that works for you, with words, and that's where Helen helps, the actual words, the actual sentences up your sleeve that you feel okay saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you're saying because often there's pressure, there's group pressure, there's all kinds of things, and you feel like if I say no, I'm going to be perceived. And if you can develop a culture where it's okay to say no, I think it makes a huge difference.
Mm.
Absolutely. Helen and Mandy, this has been great. Like I have all these tips. I'm not gonna write a book, but I feel that I have a new toolkit, and I hopefully our audience too. If you had to give just one prompt or idea or thought or reflection to the audience, which are students, educators, leaders, and professionals in organizations, what would you want them just to walk away with? Just something that you think would be a good thing for them to think about. That's kind of how we wrap up the podcast.
Well, I can go maybe, Mandy. Maybe just to come back to one of the things that we sort of started talking about in terms of being audience centric and having intention. And Mandy mentioned something about, being clear on what you're giving to the audience. But I would suggest that you go a step further and thinking about what you want your audience to take away, which is not the same. So it's
Yeah.
not my
Good.
message that I'm giving. And the way I like to frame it, very useful, is what do you want them to think, feel, or do? And being
Nice.
really intentional like that can help you be very clear and focused in your communication, no matter what it is.
Wonderful. Mandy, thank you,
Mm.
Helen.
And for me, it's really coming back to this: make connections. Don't look at the discussions, the networking, the things that you're doing as, I need something from you or you need something from me. Just be open, be smart, but make connections genuinely. Ask questions, show interest, listen, and show up with respect. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. Just want to remind our audience again the show notes. So in the show notes, you can connect with both Helen and Mandy. They've got their organizations, Present Potential and Be Inspired, and they both have their LinkedIn connection. So you cannot connect, or you can connect and you're not going to network with them. So definitely reach out. And Helen has kindly put her book there. So definitely something to consider and explore. Both of you, thank you so much for your time and just wonderful to get those insights and your reflections. This is really very rich, and we so appreciate you taking the time, sharing some of your state secrets. Uh, Just some of them. But definitely, if you're interested in doing more in this area, please reach out to both Helen and Mandy on the show notes. I know they'll be very happy to talk to you. And definitely, I highly recommend that you spend some time on their websites because they're doing some phenomenal work in these areas that so often, as both of you said, we just assume everything's fine and we forget some basic things as making those connections and having those conversations and just pausing. So thank you both. And to the audience, again, thank you for all the comments. And again, people keep connecting to our LinkedIn, and we really appreciate the feedback. And also, some of you are reaching out and saying, hey, I did this, or we've seen this. And we're always looking for guests. And we're so excited when you engage with us. And we really appreciate your support and look forward to the next time. Helen and Mandy, thank you again for being on the International Schools Podcast.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
John.
much, John.